Today we have a reading probably about the most beautiful four-letter word in the English language, or in all of language. Today's reading is from the book of 1 Corinthians. Hear what God's Spirit is saying to you. If I speak in tongues of humans and of angels, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have a prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but I do not have love, I have nothing. If I give away all my possessions, and if I hand over my body so that I may boast, but I do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable. It keeps no records of wrongs. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. But as for prophecies, they will come to an end. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will come to an end. For we know only in part, and we prophesy only in part. But when the complete comes, the partial will come to an end. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became an adult, I put an end to childish ways. For now we see only a reflection, as in a mirror. But then we will see face to face. Now I know only in part, then I will know fully, even as I have been fully known. And now faith, hope, and love remain. These three, and the greatest of these is love. Here ends the reading of the words that give us insight into God. May God grant us wisdom and courage for interpretation.
I love it. Love ya. I love you. That's so great. I love it. Love. Love. Love is all you need, right? But what exactly does that word mean, love? It's kind of an all-encompassing word in our English language, isn't it? And what exactly it means really depends on who's saying it and what the context is. It can sound different if you're reading it or if you're hearing it. And that word love, it has the power to build up relationships or to destroy them if it's used at the wrong time. It can be a heartfelt affirmation. It can convey collegiality or friendship. It can even be sarcastic. Love. Love. Love is all you need, right? A lot of times, Christians who are in our camp are kind of looked down upon by other Christians, I would say, because sometimes other Christians will say, well, you know what? You all just want to talk about love. That's all you want to talk about is love. There's more to the gospel than love, after all. But if you had to distill Jesus' teaching, or the gospel, or the whole Bible down to a single word, it would be love. And it's as easy as that. And it's as hard as that, because love may sound trite, it may sound easy, but it ain't. Love is hard. And that word love, it is beautiful and it is versatile, but in the English language, it can be hard to know exactly what you mean. But did you know that in the Bible, in Greek, there are 4 main words that are used for love, and they are different Did you know this? There are different words for love that are used in the Bible, and in English, they're all translated as love. So there is eros, and eros is the sensual, romantic, all-consuming, all the feels love. You know eros? It's named after the Greek god Eros. The Roman version is Cupid, Eros. Then there is storge love. And storge love is familial love. Like a parent feels for their child, or you feel for your parents, or siblings, or uncles, or even cousins. Storge love. It's the kind of love where you feel connected to someone even if you don't really like them, you know? Like, oh, Uncle Bob, you gotta love him. You know that? You gotta storge him. That's the love in Greek. Then there is philia. Philia. Philia is communal love, like community love, like love for a person for being a fellow human being. Kindness. Philadelphia comes from this brotherly love, right? Philia. All of this is relational love. It's built on your relationship with other people, someone you have a romantic relationship, or you're connected to as a family, or you're connected to communally. But the word that is most often used in the Bible that we translate as love isn't eros, it isn't storge, it isn't philia. It is a word called agape. And agape, sometimes translated as loving kindness or as Christian love, agape is a different kind of love. It is an uncompromising, unconditional, self-sacrificing love. And so when we read about love in the Bible, almost always the type of love that we are reading about is agape, unconditional, self-sacrificing love. So when we read that God is love, we are reading that God is agape. God is love. When we are told that we are to love our neighbor, we are told that we are to agape our neighbor. Unconditional, self-sacrificing love. And I don't know if you remember this or not, but Jesus doesn't even stop there. Jesus says, you must agape, unconditional, self-sacrificingly love even your enemy. Whew. I told you, it ain't easy. Right? Because, man, when you break it down, the kind of love that Jesus calls us to is incredibly difficult love. Unconditional, unrelenting, self-sacrificing love. What on earth got into Jesus that he thought that's the kind of love that we needed to practice? It's also the love that Paul's writing about in 1 Corinthians 13. So I think we're conditioned maybe to think that this is about eros, about romantic love, because it's often read at weddings. We often hear it in media talking about romantic love. You know, if you're going to be with this person for 50 years, love is patient, love is kind. Or sometimes we think, well, maybe it's about storge love, about familial love, right? Oh, you're going to raise those kids. Love is patient. Love is kind. Same with Uncle Bill. Love is patient. Love is kind. Or even philia, communal love. You know, if you're going to make it as a community, you got to be patient. You got to be kind. You can't be envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. But the word that Paul uses is agape, unconditional, unrelenting, self-sacrificing love. That the Christian love to which we are called is one that we practice towards everybody. And it is patient, it is kind, it is not envious or arrogant or boastful or rude. Simply put, it is beautiful and it is hard. It is hard. It's also what keeps me following Jesus. Because this type of love is the kind of thing that over and over again grabs me by the arm and the heart and the soul and wrangles me when I don't want to be wrangled. Because it calls me to compassion when I don't want to show it. Because maybe you all are better people than me, you probably are, but there are a lot of times when I'm not inclined to want to love. When I'm not inclined to want to practice unconditional, self-sacrificing love, especially towards the other. You know what I mean? The other? People who are different from me, people who look different from me, people who have different beliefs than I have. This one is hard for me. Because when people have different beliefs than I have, especially if I think they're beliefs that are harmful beliefs, that are oppressing others, I'm inclined not to love those people, but to hate those people. And the thing that Jesus calls us to is agape that transforms our souls so that we don't get wound up in all of that. And I want to give you an example. So when I heard that the former president had been shot, there was a small part of me, a small part, an unchristian part, that thought, good. But the Christian faith, the love, calls us to say violence is always wrong. That the harming of another human being is always wrong. That hate of another person is always wrong. It is unconditional, self-sacrificing love that Christ calls us to. And you know why He calls us to that type of love? It's not just because it changes and saves the world, because that kind of love is salvific. It's not just because of that, but it's also because that kind of love, agape love, it saves our very souls. It transforms us internally because it keeps us from giving into things like hate, from giving into things like bitterness or resentment. The stuff that we are sometimes inclined to allow ourselves to give into, that kind of radical love transforms us. And when we start with ourselves, that is the very beginning of changing absolutely everything. And it's what it means to be a Jesus follower. Unrelenting, unconditional, self-sacrificing agape love is the love to which we are called. And boy, oh boy, is it hard. Paul describes it in detail in 1 Corinthians 13. He goes through all this beautiful language about what love is. And then this isn't by accident, because nothing Paul says is by accident. You ever notice this? I mean, he's intentional about what he says. And Paul says this. He says, now we understand only in part. We see through a mirror dimly. And I like that version of it, I think, through a mirror dimly. Because have you ever looked in one of those old mirrors? Like, not the nice, clean, crisp mirrors that we have today, but think of a mirror even a couple hundred years ago. You've seen those in antique stores and all, where you can't really see the reflection very clearly, and maybe there's a bunch of these black spots on there and it's cloudy. You know those mirrors? You know what I'm talking about? And you look in that mirror and you kind of squint and you say, I can kind of see my reflection in that. You know that mirror? You're looking in the mirror dimly. All the understanding that we have of God is incomplete because God is ultimately ineffable, is beyond our understanding. And that's why here at UCC we say that we leave a broad room for interpretation, because all we are doing is trying to express that which is ultimately inexpressible, understanding God the best we can, making room. But if we want to know what God looks like, we look around. And I don't just mean around here at University Christian Church. I don't mean just looking around at Christianity. I don't mean just looking around at America. I don't mean just looking around at our political party. I mean looking around at absolutely everybody. And if you want to know what God looks like, it's like that. We see through a mirror dimly, but we know that the path to seeing God face to face, to understanding the completeness and fullness of God, is agape. It is unrelenting, unconditional, self-sacrificing love. It's hard, but is it ever worth living for? Jesus tells us that God is agape, unrelenting, unconditional, self-sacrificing love for us, and that feels good, right? To know that God never lets go of you, that despite what some Christians say, God is never turning God's back on you, that there is nothing you can do, nothing you can say that will make God let go of you. God is agape. And then Jesus tells us that you ought to agape, unrelentingly, unconditionally, self-sacrificingly love God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. And then that you ought to agape your neighbor as yourself. Unrelenting, unconditional, self-sacrificing love of neighbor. And that you ought to agape your enemy. Unrelenting, unsacrificing, self-sacrificing love for everyone. And so, friends, today I pray that we are all blessed, not just with any old version of love, but with agape love, with the love that calls us to be out in the world, refusing to let go whenever it is hating, a love that refuses to let us go when we want to give into those parts of us that want to hate. But instead, we're wrangled towards love, and we use that love to transform the world. May it be so, and thanks be to God. Amen.